So for people that don't know who you are, I'm sure most of the people that of my listeners have watched your documentaries. And for people that don't know who you are, go ahead and explain a little bit about your background and who inspired you to research this esoteric knowledge that you've been doing with Esoteric Agenda and Kymatica.
Well, really, just a very brief and simple background. My entire life I moved around, was in and out of the country. My father was in the military, so we were moving just about every couple years. So I got to experience a lot of different cultures at a very early age, and specifically, being the only white person in the schools and all around up until I was maybe like 12 or 13 years old. That definitely gave me a unique introspection on just the state and the condition of other cultures and the way they lived. Lived in one semi-poor nation for a little bit, and eventually came to the States. As far as somebody inspiring me into this field, I can't really point my finger at any one individual. There's a lot of them out there that I had read a lot about, but really it just happened to do with starting at an early age, maybe around 12 or 13, when I got into some of the Eastern philosophies such as Taoism and Buddhism, and then moving on into more esoteric, cryptic knowledge. It really just kind of blossomed, and by the time, I guess it was 2008 when I created Esoteric Agenda, that just seemed like the right time to put some of this information out there, because I saw that there was definitely a lot of information out there about some of the subjects that I spoke of, and I was fully aware of that, but I wanted to put it into a new perspective, being our responsibility, taking responsibility for our share in the condition of the world as a global organism called humanity. So that's pretty much what it was. I just felt that it was my duty, my responsibility to share the insight that I had gained through years of research through esoteric and psychological studies, and also philosophical, artistic, scientific studies, and then all the way up until like political, socioeconomic studies. So I just felt that it was about time to put something together and put it out there, and it just so happened to turn into Esoteric Agenda, which I wasn't even planning on turning into a film. It just happened to, I put a couple clips up online, and there seemed to be a large demand for me to finish the film, so I did. And then after that, I kind of realized the response that I was getting was unreal. I mean, I was getting 200 emails a day almost instantly after putting that film out. So I decided that upon realizing that a lot of people were really taking it to heart, really listening, I felt that it was my duty to put a lot more time and effort into it and kind of refine the information, make it a little bit more palatable. That's why I came out with Kymatica, and I did it in a way that was quite a bit different from Esoteric Agenda. Esoteric Agenda is quite a bit more on the topical level. It shows specific names and families moving through the ages, a lot of actual agendas, things that kind of seem a little bit scary, on the topical level when you look at it. And I wanted to kind of counterbalance that with Kymatica, showing that we are in ultimate control of our own destiny, and our freedom is truly governed by our own psychological, emotional, and willful state of affairs. So we have the responsibility to become free. It's not going to happen through some physical revolution. It's not going to happen through some organization. It has to be through us, through our own conscious spiritual work, and that's why I wanted to give that little bit opposite side of the spectrum from Esoteric Agenda, and that's how Kymatica came out. And then from there, really the research didn't stop. It kept picking up, and really just getting the tempo started getting picked up, and I was doing a lot more lectures and speeches outside of the country. I just got back from Brazil, actually, from a festival called Terra Nova, and there's going to be quite a bit more festivals and situations like that for me to travel outside of the country and speak, and that's what I'm looking into getting into a little bit more. But what's coming up in the near future is the Hanged Man Project. I've been talking about it for quite some time, but I felt I didn't want to rush it, so I've been taking my time with it. And it's coming along pretty well. It should be out within the next couple months, at least the first phase of it. And it really just kind of combines a little bit more of like an artistic approach rather than just an intellectual, informational approach to some of this information, because as we know through a lot of spiritual texts, a lot of mythology, and a lot of these things, these situations don't just affect us on an intellectual level, they affect us on a very symbolic level. And I want to kind of like touch upon that because there's a lot of intellectual information out there. I kind of want to be a counterbalance to that to assist in another way. So that's really what brought me up to the point that I am right now.
For people that just now tuning in, we're speaking with Ben Stewart. He is the creator of Esoteric Agenda and Kymatica documentaries. You can look them up on Google Videos or also YouTube. I highly suggest you to watch them. They're very informative. And a very powerful quote by Michael Elner, which I'm sure you've heard. Mm-hmm. Just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health. Lawyers destroy justice. Universities destroy knowledge. Governments destroy freedom. The major media destroy information. And religions destroy spirituality. Why is everything backwards, Ben?
Well, it's kind of an in-depth explanation, but really what it has to do with is to understand the actual condition of the human psyche as of right now. The current condition of the collective psyche of man really is on a collision course towards annihilation, towards self-destruction, and it's the actual reason behind it is we don't truly understand that we're being self-destructive. We don't understand that we're destroying the earth and ourselves along with it. So we're destroying the very organism that is sustaining us. So we want to believe, we manufacture and we fabricate this idea or this belief that we're evolving through technology and we're evolving through a lot of these things that we call evolution, but are really, it's nothing more than just advancements in physical mechanicities. So what's actually happening is we are devolving in a large way on a spiritual level, on an intellectual level. We are skyrocketing, but to counter that, the heart doctrine that a lot of the ancient cultures used to live by is almost completely nil right now. You hardly ever see that. So what's happening is the actual like the subtle bodies of man, the emotional bodies, the mental bodies, they're deteriorating along with the actual physical body of the earth. So in a sense where if you want to look at it scientifically, what happens to a tree when it's starting to die, basically it either falls over just from weakness, but you'll notice that there are different organisms such as like fungus and different things that act as a catabolic organism to break down like the physical body of it. But that happens on many different levels. It happens on more subtle levels of energy. So us, within our body, a lot of what's happened through repression and through the ego trapping consciousness, what actually happens is the subtle bodies within us begin a catabolic process. So we're actually, in a large way, organs of the earth, like large organs of the earth are shutting down systematically. The oceans, as we can see with this BP spill, which I'll actually touch upon a little bit later, the lungs of the earth being like the rainforest and the trees and the flora of the earth, the central nervous system being like the metallic deposits within the earth. All of this is being upplanted, uprooted, destroyed, or manufactured, or put into a commodity, bought and sold, put on different spots of the earth, completely eradicated, poisoned, polluted. So this is the organism of the earth that we are literally destroying, and the same thing is happening within us on a microcosmic scale. We are like pretty much on a catabolic process where things are breaking down within us, and we are purposely, subconsciously sabotaging our own existence, and we don't understand why, But when it really gets to it, the reason why everything's backwards was part of that quote saying, doctors destroy health, all of those things that are completely backwards from what you would imagine. It seems like it would just be there's this, underlying sinister, demonic agenda of, like an elite few that are like guiding the hand of humanity and trying to destroy it. But really what it is it's that underlying force that pushes all of humanity. Some people call it the zeitgeist that we subscribe to. But really what's happening is we are devolving on many subtle levels, and we don't see it because we have completely glossed over any understanding of the more subtle levels of nature, and we have pretty much put all of our stock and all of our investment in an intellectual form of understanding. So that's why you see technology skyrocketing, because it's purely intellectual. And that's not to say that technology in any way, shape, or form is negative, but it's just the sheer balance. And I don't think anybody can deny the direction that we've been bringing the entire planet. Regardless of the debate on global warming or anything like that, that means absolutely nothing to me anymore. Really, what it is, there's no denying that humanity as a whole invades every single part of the country, or every single part of the world, for that matter, destroys the natural habitat, pushes the animal or the wildlife out of those ecosystems, which is killing them off, destroying, all the flora and the fauna, invading every single part, that we possibly can. We're depleting the natural resources. And now, as we see off the Gulf Coast, it was April 20th, which is actually a very, peculiar date for something like this to happen. But it was April 20th when the BP explosion and the spill started, and it's been going on ever since. And this is just, regardless of whether that was conscious or unconscious, that's a testament to the direction that we're heading, and largely not looking at the specific events and not looking at the specific things that have been happening within the past 50 or 100 years in humanity, just looking at the overall direction that humanity is heading and humanity is taking the earth. It's absolutely appalling, and that is what you see with this catabolic approach. This catabolic process that we're going through, we are, in essence, the same as what cancer cells or any virus would do, unconsciously begins to deplete the natural resources of everything else around it, because it consumes and consumes and consumes, and it doesn't have that shut-off mechanism to say, okay, you're full, you're satiated, you don't need to consume anymore. And that shut-off mechanism is a direct link to the central nervous system in the body. And to expand that out to what's going on with humanity, humanity has lost that link with the earth, the central nervous system of the earth being that intelligence of nature. So this catabolic process is a natural result of what happens when you lose your connection with your higher being, which in this case is our earth, and we have absolutely lost our connection.
It seems to me that people are waking up to this control grid of our government and waking up consciously and are understanding that the religious and academic institutions, aren't very truthful and they all lie. But we still don't it seems like we're not very proactive or not active enough. Because, for an example, let's say that a referee during a football game calls a bad call, a horrible call against the other team, and it's clearly obvious that it was a bad call. All that's going to happen is people are going to boo and name-call the referee. That is how I believe we are waking up. We are booing and name-calling the referee, just like on the streets or chatting on message forums all over the Internet. Although that may help to a certain degree, but still nothing is going to be accomplished by doing that. No matter how much we boo and badmouth the referee or the government, religion, and other controlling factors, the same outcome is going to happen. Nothing, and so we just sit back and watch the bad call that the referee made, which is going to change the course of the game. I guess all I'm trying to say is, what is the major factor of why we seem to be stuck in a rut and trying to move forward consciously and as a society?
Well, what it really is it's ineffective and unconscious action that we're taking. The reason why I look back at a lot of ancient cultures and ancient actual like spiritual methodologies that really they're not rooted in this airy-fairy fantasy world of spirituality. It's rooted in the actual principles of nature, things that we still feel today. So, such as in Buddhism, 3 fundamental keys to in their principle of life is, first you need right view, secondly you need right will, or right intention, and thirdly and lastly, that is when you go to right action. But if you miss those first 2 steps, it's the same as trying to put together a jungle gym and just skipping to the last step and putting things together, and then you realize that it's about to fall, completely crumble to the ground because you skipped every step all the way up into the take action part. So really, the first being right view. First thing you need to take any proper action in any way, shape, or form is to view the world properly. And that's one thing that I can say, even with myself, it's very difficult to view the world properly because it actually takes a little bit of subtlety. It's not just an intellectual thing. We don't just break it down and compartmentalize it and say, okay, these are the 4 kingdoms, the mineral, the plant, the animal, and the human kingdom, and then this is black, this is white, this is male, this is female, and we compartmentalize everything and break it down and put them into categories. Well, that's a purely intellectual way of doing it, and instead of taking a step back and trying to truly view the core, the root of the problems, such as, why did that ref call a bad call? Instead of actually taking a look at the actual core of the problem, the thing that I see the most is the fact that people want to take action immediately. They take an initial look at the world, and without understanding that they're applying a lot of their cultural values, they're applying a lot of their learned behavioral values, and a lot of their subconscious behavioral quirks. All of that value they are placing on what they see, and then from that point they have an opinion on the world. And from that opinion, then they immediately jump into, well, I want this, I want everything out here to help make me feel free on the inside, because that's initially what everybody truly wants. They just want to feel free, and they want some form of contentment or love or happiness. So they say, well, with this view of the world, this is what's wrong with the world, and at first glance, it's all of these things outside of me that I can see. It's the government, it's money, it's not having enough of this, it's having too much of this, it's living here, it's not being able to affect this person and not be able to manipulate this person to do what I want. Typically, people believe that other things, the external world, is, if you change the conditions of the external world, then it'll change the conditions of the internal world. But that's actually completely opposite. So we go along immediately jumping into the action of, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and change the outside world, and I'm going to try and maybe put a petition out and have people sign it and get this person thrown out of office because it looks like this person is the one that's actually creating a lot of these ulterior motives and all of these backhand deals in government or in or in the economic field. And really, that all can be boiled down to its wrong view. You need to have a right view of how these things actually happen, and then you need, from that point, you need the intention of wanting, like your intentions and your will. You need to long for the evolution of all mankind, the support, the compassion, the love for all living things, and not just humanity. All living things, you want to support evolution of life in general. Without that, then you start breaking it back down and you compartmentalize it and you say, well, humans have more of a right than animals, that's why we see a lot of animal cruelty, and humans have more rights than the mineral kingdom, so that's why we see a lot of the destruction of and the uprooting of a lot of natural resources and thrown to different sides of the world that they're not naturally supposed to be in. And that's why we see the same thing with logging and destruction of the rainforest and everything, and the pollution. We just don't seem to really care because all we can see is what immediately makes us feel better. And that's really, what we see in this world today is instant gratification. So it's a form of the reason why the world is the way it is today. If I can boil it down to make a very large blanket statement, it's all due to wrong view of how our world actually operates. Not just the physical world, not just taking a look at it and seeing it with your actual eyes, the actual experience of how the world affects you on a very subtle level. Like, how does it affect your emotional field? How does it affect your thoughts? How does it affect your will? What is it that actually creates your willpower? Why do you have the desire to feel these things? Why do you have the desire to feel or to be a part of this crowd or to look like this? Most people don't even understand why they have desire to do anything. It's because they don't truly sit and understand that prior spark. Nobody really understands what comes before thought, what comes before intention or desire. And that's actually what consciousness is. And true consciousness, unconditioned consciousness, I should say, is just a form of simple observation. And when you get to that, when you get to true unconditioned consciousness, that is right view. That's being able to see the world for what it truly is. But when we start applying our cultural values on everything, then it becomes conditioned consciousness, and that conditioning forces us to see the world in a different way. We see the world the way we want to see it. And then from there, we want to see the world this way, so our intention becomes skewed because we don't see the world correctly, so there's no way for our intention to be on the right path after that point. And then after that, people jump straight into action. Well, I'm going to try and get this person thrown out of office. Or maybe we can, follow what the Constitution says, and it's the duty and the right of the people to abolish this form of government and start over again. I actually get a lot of people emailing me specifically with that line of the Constitution saying, hey, let's do something like this. Let's start up a revolution. Let's start a movement to, with using this one line, saying that we can abolish this form of government if we reach a critical mass with support, and abolish just like the framework of our current existing government. And I always have to say, like, do you understand? When I reply, I don't say yay or nay. I try not to immediately jump into an opinion. I just say, can you tell me with absolute certainty that you know why you want to do this? Do you absolutely know why you want to abolish the government? You want to abolish this form of government and start up new. What kind of new government would you like to start up? And furthermore, what makes you think that you know the proper form of government to start up from that point? Because everybody as of this point, there's 6.7, maybe 6.8 billion people on the planet, and there are 6.7 or 6.8 billion different opinions about the world. So that's why we see the world being stretched in 6.8 billion different ways, and that's why it's being depleted of all of its natural resources, and it's being destroyed from the inside out. That's why we see all of this, is because no one truly agrees, because nobody sees the world for what it actually is. So there's no right view, there's no more right intention in that respect. Even a lot of the organizations that are here with the intention to help, a lot of the times, without understanding what they're actually doing, they're causing or inciting a type of emotion, like some type of primal emotion within a large group, rallying people together with this idea that we're going to completely revolutionize the world, yet none of them truly understand why they want to revolutionize it. And I shouldn't say none of them, but the large majority don't understand why they want this revolution, nor do they understand what's going to happen afterwards, nor do they understand what drove them to even have the desire for change in the first place. So it becomes a very, very subtle, very crucial point to make, that before taking action, before standing up and trying to start a movement or start any type of action whatsoever, you need to truly understand what it is that makes you want to initiate that action and what you plan to get out of it, and then take an honest assessment. Am I actually going to feel free by doing something like this? Is tearing down the walls of government actually going to make me feel free? Or is that freedom still not part of my subconscious, neural network, behavioral quirks? Is that where the freedom lies, or does it actually lie in the framework of government? Because we definitely see symptoms of slavery in the world today, in the physical world. But when you truly sit and spend some time, and I mean spend honest time, discovering what makes you feel free, not what you think might make you feel free in the future, but sit and actually feel, why do you feel enslaved? What is it about you that feels restricted or contracted from nature or from anything that you desire? What makes you feel enslaved and bound and fettered to something that you don't want when there's something else that you do want? What is that feeling? And exactly what do you truly believe, being very honest, what do you truly believe would make you experience true freedom? And that's why the Hanged Man project that I'm coming out with right now, I was very, very careful of making sure that if I ever, I'm coming out with a project, the next thing is going to be an actual audio book that I'm coming out with. And in there, every time I use the word either movement or revolution, I make sure I always follow it up with the word consciousness, because I'm not looking to revolutionize anything except for the consciousness, because I don't believe that there's any true revolution that doesn't have its roots deeply rooted within consciousness. And if there is a revolution or a supposed revolution or movement or some type of cause or a rebellion that is not rooted in consciousness, then in my personal belief, it's not going to work. Nothing's truly going to come out of it. It's just going to change the topical decorations of the existing slavery right now. And the prime example of that is, look at the past several thousand years. There have been countless revolutions, countless physical revolutions of empires growing to the top and then being torn down to the bottom. Another one growing up in its wake and then being torn to the bottom. And then another one growing up in a different area and then being torn back down to the ground. What's happened ever since then? Has the world gotten any better within the past several thousand years after all of those revolutions? I don't see any evidence supporting that. I don't see any evidence saying that the world has gone into a better direction because of any of these revolutions. Because typically what happens is when there is a revolution, government is torn down to the ground. What typically happens as of that point is the people who try to start a new framework, starting from scratch, they're still rooted within the psychological, emotional, mental framework of the existing form of government, because government works on two forms. It works on the physical level and on the mental level, and then on a emotional level. So when you just destroy the physical level and you revolutionize, say you tear down an empire, then what happens is all of those people that were part of it, that destroyed it, and they want to start something else new, a lot of those, they still have greed. They still have lust. They still have pride, envy. They have all of these things. So with their greed that they haven't destroyed, because greed is a very, very subtle form of fear, and it's a subtle form of ego, if you haven't destroyed that and you're trying to start up a new form of government after a huge revolution, completely revolutionizing the form of government, what happens is if the people who are rebuilding have any greed within them, what are they going to do? They're going to look at history and they're going to say, well, this is how the Rothschild dynasty became super powerful. This is how the Rockefellers became super powerful. These are how these other people got into power and maintain their power. So what's going to happen is these people who are starting to rebuild it are going to learn from the past dynasty rulers, the past elite, and they're going to reform it in a way, even if they think they're doing it for the good of all mankind, they're still doing it in the exact same format that it was done before. And that's why in the Hanged Man project, I'm very, very careful to say the revolution because I'm all for revolution, and I'm all for a rebellion, but it has to be the right rebellion. It has to be the right movement, the right revolution, and it has to start with consciousness, because nothing is going to change if you do not affect the core, the root of the problem, and annihilate it. Then once it's annihilated, then you can move forward, and then the physical can change, and then the physical will bring about the freedom that you truly wanted in the first place. But it's not going to happen, and it's definitely not going to last if it doesn't start on a conscious level. If it's just topical, then that's where your revolution is going to start, and that's where your revolution is going to end, on a topical level. You're still not going to be free. You're still going to feel all of those egos, all of those fears, and all of that slavery deep down inside on an emotional, mental, and willful level.
Wow, right on, man. You are giving me goosebumps because you are right on, dude. But one reason why I believe that we have been enslaved consciously and physically, and how the elite of the world have gotten their power is because we believe everything that we hear. Example, like we believe everything that we hear in Hollywood. We believe everything in religion, what the pastor tells us, and everything in the mainstream media and academia. Example that I did a few months ago at work. I came in one day and I was just what I was gonna do, or what I did, I created a lie. Mm-hmm. I went into work and I said, okay, I told everybody that an article that I read on the internet, and I can't remember exactly what I said. I think it was something about like some mother eating her child's fingers. I know that's horrible, but I created some outrageous lie. I know that's possible. Yeah, that's possible.
Right.
But I made some outrageous lie, and everybody at my job believed me. They believed me. Like they believed that I read this article that had this woman eating her child's fingers, and they were talking. They talked about that probably for at least a couple hours, and nobody opposed to what I said. They believed everything that I said about the article that I read, although they didn't know that I made it up and it's just a lie. How come we believe everything that gets handed down to us in religion and mainstream and academia? Why do we believe everything that people, quote unquote, higher in power tell us? Like, how come we just can't be ourselves and try to find our own truth and our own guidance and try to expand our own consciousness instead of just believing everything that is spit out to us? Well,
there's two important aspects to remember with something like that. And remember, this is just my own humble opinion with a subject like this. But when it comes to people believing everything that they hear, there's an aspect of that that's not really seen, because yes, people will believe anything that they hear, because a lot of the times they don't really have the time or the energy to really even put forth the effort to wonder whether it's true or not, because it's something that's more just like a 2 or 3 second fantasy for them. Like, wow, that's amazing, a mother ate her child's fingers. But it doesn't really affect them on a long-term level. It's just something that they hear, they quickly digest through their intellect, and then they quickly let it go. And so it's something that they don't place enough value on certain things, such as what people hear on the radio or on the news, or what they see in the movies, or just word of mouth. The reason why people take that and just believe it regardless is because not many people place enough value on things like that. So because it's very primal. The way we work right now, the way our subconscious works is on a highly primal level, even though on a conscious level, which really only makes up for 5% of our consciousness, the other 95% is completely primal and animalistic. 5% is highly intellectual, and that's the facade, that's the persona that we give off to the public, is that 5% of consciousness that we intellectualize. But everything else is actually on a very sense-based, and I'm saying sense through the emotions and through subtle levels. So when people see things on the radio, it does on a very small way, hear things on the radio, see things on the news, on TV, in a very subtle way, it does affect them, and over time, with constant repetition, it entrains them, hardwires, like literally the synapses, the dendrites in the brain, it hardwires them to understand a certain principle about the world. Wow, there are people out there that, there are mothers that mutilate their children, that drown their children, that, slit their children's throats, because this has happened. Just within the past couple of years, all these things have happened, and it's coming to the point where it doesn't even really make that much of a difference to us. When we hear about it, we're like, wow, you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of 2 months ago when the same exact thing happened in 5 other places at the same exact time. And then, and then 5 years ago the same thing happened, except it was a man instead of a woman. This stuff happens so so consistently that we place less and less value on it, and it just becomes another one of those things that becomes a part of our norm, our cultural norms. So when you become comfortable with information like this, it doesn't really matter to them. So that's one of the subtle levels as to why people will believe anything that they hear, or anything that they read, anything along those lines. They just automatically believe it. And secondly, it's more or less part of the ego. One of the main characteristics, one of the traits of the ego is fantasy, and it's fantasizing. And it's when we hear certain things that seem so wild, things like, wow, I thought that only happened in the movies, like a high-speed chase that ended in a shootout and 15 people dying. I thought that only happened in the movies. That's awesome. That even if they don't admit the fact that they like it, on a very primal level, it's actually something that excites them in some way. And I'm not saying exciting the way that we typically think of the word now. Exciting just being like stimulating. And we are so utterly attached to stimulation that we want to hear these things. This is actually why there's not only do we go out to the movies all the time, we want to see these, high-speed chases, we want to see these horror movies, we want to see these action movies, and these sappy movies that, really tug on our heartstrings. We want to see that because it stimulates a certain part, a certain very subtle, either neural or just very subtle energetic stimulation within us, and it gives us a specific feeling that we're looking for. And it also allows, a lot of these movies allow for us to sublimate our angst and allows us to, in some way, vent and project our anger and our sadness and our loneliness onto the screen. So when it happens in real life, such as when David Icke really hit his heyday and Alex Jones really hit his heyday, and people were just eating this information up, like, wow, I thought this was only in the movies. I can't believe this is actually happening in real life. So in many ways, they started to understand the conspiracy culture, the pop conspiracy movement really came out of this utter fascination of, wow, this is how the world is. I want to learn more. I want to learn more. I want to learn more. I want to know what's going on. I want to know if these people are doing this or if there's certain money being changed here. I want to know what the truth is behind 9/11. I want to know all these things. And that's great. That's a thirst for knowledge. But there's also attached with it, because none of this is just cut and dry. There's no such thing as, unless you are absolutely 100% awakened consciousness, there's no such thing as a very cut and dry intention towards what we move towards. Typically, there's 5 or 10 or even 1,000 subtle little intentions as to why we do something. And in many ways, the people that are really, really wrapped up in just the fear-mongering of conspiracy, a lot of it, unfortunately, because some of it definitely comes from wanting to understand the workings of the world, and they want to know how to protect themselves, and they also just they want to know what they can do to help humanity. and that is a very admirable drive. But there's also, along with it, attached to it, there's this drive of wanting that fantasy. They want to see a movie in real life. When movies kind of lose their luster because, the movie 2012, I've seen that same story 500 times just with a different name in a different movie. So what actually happens is when that loses its luster, we want something more that stimulates us a bit more, and it's the same as a drug. The reason why people become addicted to drugs is because it stimulates something in them, and then once that stimulation doesn't do the trick anymore, they add more, and that's where it starts from a once a week habit to a 3-4 times a week habit to everyday habit to 5 times a day habit, because it's this addiction to stimulation. And it's the same thing, just in a completely different way. It's the same thing when you are completely, utterly dependent upon stimulation, and the movies aren't doing it anymore. Then you want to see it in real life, and then eventually you want to see it right in front of your eyes. And that's kind of what's happening in the world today. When we see a lot of this unconscious behavior everywhere, and it's not just over in the Middle East anymore. It's not just in these third world countries that are war-ravaged. It's now spreading through every single little neighborhood throughout the United States, Canada, North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. It's spreading through every single culture because people are becoming indoctrinated and entrained in this way to where they become addicted without even realizing it. Without even realizing that they're becoming addicted to TV. They're addicted to some of these products that are on the market, that just because the FDA says it's all right, it means that it's not a drug and it's all right to take, because culturally it's acceptable. While cocaine is not, Xanax is. While heroin is not, we have other anti-anxiety meds, or some of the most lethal meds that really screw with the central nervous system, screw with just subtle levels of dopamine receptors and things like that. A lot of these things that are just taken for granted, we just accept that, and that is the way that we are seeing all these cultures turning. They're looking for ultimate stimulation, and they're becoming addicted without their knowledge. And that's really one of the main staples, which I kind of get to in this audiobook that I'm working on right now, is the growing addictions that we're not even aware of. It's growing a global addiction to stimulation, and it doesn't. The danger is that the drug of stimulation, can come in any way, shape, or form. And it just has to do with something that we are dependent upon without even realizing it, and then it becomes harmful. Our dependency becomes harmful on it. So really that is why we just tend to believe everything that we see on the media. We see newscasters saying this, well, there's no reason to deny it, and plus it sounds fantastic, so of course I'm going to believe it, because I want to believe these things about my world, because it gives me a little bit of stimulation. It gives me a feeling of purpose. When I see, these horrible things like the oil spill, the BP oil spill off the Gulf Coast, a lot of, admirable things happen, but it's a drive towards stimulation, because had that not happened, and had Katrina not happened, there wouldn't have been this huge movement, this huge flood of people wanting to go down there and help. So there are good aspects to it. And a lot of these things do bring about some good aspects, but on a subtle level, again, what's attached to that dependency upon stimulation is nothing but addiction, and that's what we need to be aware of. So I try to be very careful when I say, this is what we need to do, or this is the direction that we need to be going in, because really it's not that simple, because a lot of the times when people are doing admirable things, sometimes they're not doing it for admirable intentions. And sometimes when people are doing things that are not very admirable, they're doing it for very admirable, their intentions are very admirable. So it's a very subtle and fine line, and that's why it can't be me that says, this is the way we need to revolutionize the world. And that's why I never give an actual picture of what I want to say, what I say I want the world to look like. That's why I never give actual instructions. I get people emailing me all the time saying, it's great, I understand how we create our world and how, like our psychological and emotional state, how that truly energetically affects our environment. I understand that, but what do we do from here? How do we change? What's your ultimate goal? I'm very, very careful not to mention anything about what I actually want to see or what I want people to start doing, other than paying attention to themselves and their own consciousness and forming a relationship with themselves. Because there's absolutely nothing wrong that could ever come from at least understanding yourself a little bit more. And beyond that, I can't sit here and say that I have the answers, I have the solutions. That would be very irresponsible of me. And if I were to do something along those lines in the future, I would hope that everybody who has seen or heard or listened to anything that I've done in the past, I would hope that they understand that they should be very skeptical of my work. If I ever start saying, okay, we need to follow this master, or we need to start doing this, and this is the way I want to see the world turn out, if any of that actually comes about, I would hope that people would be very, very skeptical and question even things that I say. Because there's not one person in the world other than you, yourself, that can really tell you. And it's not even like you yourself understand that it's not just the intellect. You have to listen to the heart. You have to listen to those subtle forces of nature. That's really what you need to start listening to, because if you are following anything else, then that is the very definition of slavery. So that's, to answer your question, it really just has to do with this very, very primal form of a very uncomfortable feeling about being free. The reason we want to be sucked into slavery, the reason we are comfortable in our slavery, is because we've found comfort in it. We would rather be comfortable in slavery than uncomfortable in no man's land in a very free and sovereign way, because we have no idea. It's that uncomfortable, dark area that we can't see into. We can't see the future. We have no idea how it's going to feel. We have no idea what's going to happen if we actually become free and self-governing, once we are responsible for our own lives. Because as of right now, we're still children. We move out of the house at 18 or 19 or whatever it is. We move away from our parents, but we just replace it with government. We replace it with our jobs, replace it with money. We replace those parental figures with other forms of parents, just in other ways. And that's because we don't want to be free. We truly don't really know what freedom entails, so we would rather stay in our tiny little bubble of slavery. Just as long as we have what we had always expected, then we'll feel all right. We'll feel comfortable. So that's really, in essence, that's what I see happening right now.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it any better, Ben. And to round things up here, I'm going to allow you about 5 minutes. We have about 6 minutes left of the show, but go ahead and explain how can we unite the world spiritually, physically, and consciously without having a few bad apples that are at the top start using their power to manipulate us and control us even more than we're being controlled now, physically and consciously. How do we move on and evolve instead of devolve without having the lead of the world control us even more?
Well, it's very simple in principle. It's very difficult in action, because really what it has to do is the most uncomfortable form of action, like I was just saying, is to revolutionize yourself. It's very comfortable to revolutionize things outside, and everybody, seems to have this idea where they want everything else in the world to change except for themselves. They would like to see everything else get better, but they don't want to have to change. They want to be the exact same person, just in a utopian society. And really what it has to do with the way to do this, this is why my friend out in Australia, his name is Max Egan, he says it all the time. It's through a form of non-compliance. The only way that people have power over one another is the acceptance, the acquiescence of power. We allow certain people to rise in place into power. And if you don't understand how we allow those people, because it's not just a conscious thing. It's not like, all right, well then I'm going to allow George Bush or Barack Obama to rise in place and, to completely wreak havoc. It's not on a conscious level. It's on a very subconscious level, and we attracted that globally. So the only way to stop attracting that is to take a step back, truly become observant from moment to moment. And I don't mean to be observant of the world, and I don't mean to be observant of what's going on in the news or anything like that. Observe you in your own environment. Observe your mind. Observe how you feel emotionally. Observe every little thing about you, because I guarantee, and I only make this guarantee because I've gone through this and I understand it on my own, is when you become more observant from moment to moment of your own life every single day, you begin to realize that a lot of the slavery, if not all of it, truly exists in your mind. Yes, there is a lot of slavery out in the physical world, but 99.9% of it exists in the mind, and it's all because of some stimulation that we are not even aware of. So my honest opinion is just become aware of yourself, become aware of your own consciousness and your egos, and don't fight. Try to remove that from your vocabulary. Don't fight the egos. Become aware of them and stop feeding them. That's all it is. The egos in our physical world, our manifestation of egos, turns out to be those Barack Obamas, those George Bushes, those Rothschilds, those Rockefellers, those elite families, what most people would call the NWO. Those are the actual manifestations of our egos. How do we plan to understand them if we don't understand how they came into power? They came into power because we fed them, literally. They are a monster in a very, very literal, subtle way. They are monsters that we have fed from day one. We have nursed them from childhood, from the birth, their inception, all the way up to what they are right now. We are David, they are Goliath. And we allowed them to get that way because we fed them not in the typical way. We fed them with energy. We fed them with our allowance of them to do this. They are nothing more than a reflection of those monstrous egos inside of us. And the only way to truly stop feeding them is to stop feeding them within us. Nothing's going to change on the topical level if nothing changes on an internal level. So really, collectively, if we do our own work and stop worrying about other people and stop pointing the finger and say, well, they're not doing it, they're not being conscious of themselves every day, they're not worrying about who they truly are and having a relationship with their self, their higher self, don't worry about that. Do your own work. If you live in the moment and appreciate every moment for what it is and stop worrying about the end result, stop worrying about things that are to come, worry about the process. Enjoy the process of forming a relationship with yourself. When you start doing that, then you stop feeding. You stop becoming a part of the problem. And honestly, that's the only thing that we can do. The only thing you as an individual can do is stop contributing to the ego. Stop contributing to this monster that's growing around us. We are in ultimate control of our own destiny, and our freedom is truly governed by our own psychological, emotional, and willful state of affairs. So we have the responsibility to become free. It's not going to happen through some physical revolution. It's not going to happen through some organization. It has to be through us, through our own conscious spiritual work. And that's why I wanted to give that little bit opposite side of the spectrum from Esoteric Agenda, and that's how Kymatica came out. And then from there, really the research didn't stop. It kept picking up, and really just getting the tempo started getting picked up, and I was doing a lot more lectures and speeches outside of the country. I just got back from Brazil, actually, from a festival called Terra Nova, and there's going to be quite a bit more festivals and situations like that for me to travel outside of the country and speak, and that's what I'm looking into getting into a little bit more. but what's coming up in the near future is the Hanged Man project. I've been talking about it for quite some time, but I felt I didn't want to rush it, so I've been taking my time with it, and it's coming along pretty well. It should be socioeconomic studies, so I just felt that it was about time to put something together and put it out there, and it just so happened to turn into Esoteric Agenda, which I wasn't even planning on turning into a film. It just happened to, I put a couple clips up online, and there seemed to be a large demand for me to finish the film, so I did. And then after that, I kind of realized the response that I was getting was unreal. I mean, I was getting 200 emails a day almost instantly after putting that film out. So I decided that upon realizing that a lot of people were really taking it to heart, really listening, I felt that it was my duty to put a lot more time and effort into it and kind of refine the information, make it a little bit more palatable. That's why I came out with Kymatica, and I did it in a way that was quite a bit different from Esoteric Agenda. Esoteric Agenda is quite a bit more on the topical level. It shows specific names and families moving through the ages, a lot of actual agendas, things that kind of seem a little bit scary, on the topical level when you look at it. And I wanted to kind of counterbalance that with Kymatica, showing that.
So for people that don't know who you are, I'm sure most of the people that of my listeners have watched your documentaries. And for people that don't know who you are, go ahead and explain a little bit about your background and who inspired you to research this esoteric knowledge that you've been doing with Esoteric Agenda and Kymatica.
Well, really, just a very brief and simple background. My entire life I moved around, was in and out of the country. My father was in the military, so we were moving just about every couple years. So I got to experience a lot of different cultures at a very early age, and specifically, being the only white person in the schools and all around up until I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. That definitely gave me a unique introspection on just the state and the condition of other cultures and the way they lived. Lived in one semi-poor nation for a little bit, and eventually came to the States. As far as somebody inspiring me into this field, I can't really point my finger at any one individual. There's a lot of them out there that I had read a lot about, but really it just happened to do with starting at an early age, maybe around 12 or 13, when I got into some of the Eastern philosophies such as Taoism and Buddhism, and then moving on into more esoteric, cryptic knowledge. It really just kind of blossomed, and by the time, I guess it was 2008 when I created Esoteric Agenda, that just seemed like the right time to put some of this information out there, because I saw that there was definitely a lot of information out there about some of the subjects that I spoke of, and I was fully aware of that, but I wanted to put it into a new perspective, being our responsibility, taking responsibility for our share in the condition of the world as a global organism called humanity. So that's pretty much what it was. I just felt that it was my duty, my responsibility to share the insight that I had gained through years of research through esoteric and psychological studies, and also philosophical, artistic, scientific studies, and then all the way up until political out within the next couple months, at least the first phase of it. And it really just kind of combines a little bit more of an artistic approach rather than just an intellectual, informational approach to some of this information, because as we know through a lot of spiritual texts, a lot of mythology, and a lot of these things, these situations don't just affect us on an intellectual level, they affect us on a very symbolic level. And I want to kind of touch upon that, because there's a lot of intellectual information out there. I kind of want to be a counterbalance to that to assist in another way. So that's really what brought me up to the point that I am right now.
For people that just now tuning in, we're speaking with Ben Stewart. He is the creator of Esoteric Agenda and Kymatica documentaries. You can look them up on Google Videos or also YouTube. I I highly suggest you to watch them. They're very informative. And a very powerful quote by Michael Elner, which I'm sure you've heard. Just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health. Lawyers destroy justice. Universities destroy knowledge. Governments destroy freedom. The major media destroy information. And religions destroy spirituality.